Hi, it's Saturday, July 19th, and we have two systems to talk about in the tropics today. The first one is Tropical Storm Wipha. Now, entering the South China Sea this morning in the Western Pacific, you can see the system has made quite a northward jog since yesterday. Yesterday, when we talked about it, it was just east of the northern Philippines, and since then the system has tracked northwest and is now north of the Philippines, and we've likely seen the center as well get a little bit more compact like we've talked about being possible yesterday. The reasoning for that is because we had that broad circulation yesterday morning, and the southern part of that interacted with the heavy terrain in northern Philippines, and that has likely disrupted that and allowed a more compact area of low pressure to form on the north side of it that remained over water. You can see how this may have happened. This is simulated from the GFS model, showing you out to yesterday morning, that broad area of low pressure just east of the Philippines. And then as we went throughout the night tonight, that broad circulation pushed over the northern part of the Philippines. So the southern half was being impacted by the high terrain, and on the northern part that's still over water, with all the convection going off, we had a new, more compact area of low pressure form. And that's what now is forecast to track west and make landfall here in southern China this weekend. Now, so far, we have not seen the system intensifying at a very quick to rapid pace. And like I mentioned yesterday, I don't think that's overly likely because we are going to have some persisting moderate vertical shear impacting this system pretty much up to landfall in China. You can see part of that if you look at the convective structure with the system right now. The center is likely somewhere in here, and you can see this convection wrapping around to the south side. This is a curved band structure. One thing you often look at for these systems trying to form an eye-on-eye wall structure. But if I resume this loop, you'll see that over the past several hours, this has not really been making a lot of progress onto the eastern and northern sides of the center of the storm. And that's likely because we have this push of southeasterly shear being impinged upon the vortex. This is best seen if we look at the water vapor imagery. You can see that there are some cloud elements here just east of where the storm is centered that are pushing off towards the north and west. And this is because we have a weak area of high pressure aloft over the southern Japanese islands. I can show you this in an even better way if we look at the GFS analysis of the upper level pattern. Here's that clockwise turning, that's that upper level high over the southern Japanese islands. And here's that southeasterly flow coming into the backside of the storm. And so this is forecast to persist over the next few days. You can see as it gets towards landfall in China, we still have this stronger easterly shear aloft being impinged upon the storm. And so models are split onto exactly if the system is going to be able to close off an eye-on-eye wall structure and intensify into a typhoon, or just keep struggling like it is this morning and just remain a severe tropical storm as it comes in. Now, so far, we have seen some pretty gradual strengthening on this since yesterday, and I do think that gradual strengthening trend is likely to continue, and we'll likely end up with something near or at typhoon intensity by landfall in China. But something to keep in mind is that even though we did get a more compact center in this, this is still, all in all, a broad tropical cyclone. And you can see that again if we look at water vapor imagery, just the expanse of all the rain across southeastern Asia. And this is a problem because even though we are not talking about a very strong typhoon coming in, that's still going to have a very broad wind field when it comes in, and especially on the north side, that's going to be dangerous because as it comes in to China, that means it's pushing more water on the north side of it towards the landmass, and that means it's going to have a lot more storm surge to push ashore. And especially with this coastline, you can see how ragged the coast is of China, and those little inlets where the coastline goes a little bit inland is a perfect spot for storm surge to rush into and flood inland areas along the coast. And that's my primary concern with this system. And alongside that, we're also going to get, as I talked about yesterday a lot of rainfall with this system. And when rainfall falls down over here, it's going to be trying to go back into the ocean. But the problem is we're going to have all this southerly flow coming inland. So this could make worse the inland flooding impacts from the freshwater rainfall. The storm surge that we see could make that flooding worse inland because it's going to make it more difficult for all that freshwater flooding to go out back into the ocean. And that could mean for a very wet, rainy, floody weekend here in southern China and getting into early next week. Now, this is the current forecast from Pagasa. You can see the very broad wind field that we have associated with the system. Again, very strong influence on the north side that will likely be pushing that water ashore, but becoming a severe tropical storm later today and likely nearing typhoon intensity by landfall in southern China. There's a little bit of a spread on exactly where we get landfall. Some models are up the coast from Hong Kong, some keep it offshore a little bit longer, coming in just south of Hong Kong. But either way, significant impacts are on the way for much of the southern coast of China. And unfortunately, like I talked about yesterday, we're likely to see more development behind Wipha in the Philippine Sea. And it may turn out to be that the low pressure that forms here may be close enough to interact with Wipha before it gets too far west. So the system may begin to stall out and track south, which could bring a lot more rainfall than you would normally expect in southern China. You can see on this rainfall forecast from the JFS Ensemble, firstly in the Philippines and Taiwan. Now, this is over the next 7 days. This is not purely from Wipha, but this is because of the other system we have forming behind it. We could have rainfall totals 300, 400, 500 millimeters in all, or more beyond that in some of the higher terrain of these two regions. But you can see as Wipha tracks west and potentially stalls out here in southern China, we could be seeing a widespread region of 200 millimeters of rainfall or more fall in a fairly short period of time, which could mean very significant flooding here in southern China. Now, it remains to be seen exactly what happens beyond that point. Some models have it digging into Vietnam. Some models have it coming back south into the South China Sea. And maybe beyond that point, we have to watch it again for potential recurvature coming back north. But we'll talk about that when we get there. First things first, we got to deal with all the impacts that we're getting over the next few days with the system as it comes through. And I'll leave links to local weather opposites for all these areas at the top of the description, and I'll have more videos on this system as it does continue tracking west. Okay, now we're going to move to the Atlantic, and I know I said that we probably won't have to talk about this basin until late July, but models have been trying to pick up on some development in the tropical Atlantic as we head into next week with a tropical wave that's now moving offshore of Africa. You can see a lot of disorganized showers and storms just south of the Cabo Verde Islands. This is a part of a tropical wave that's now coming off the landmass, and it's going to be tracking west throughout the tropical Atlantic over the next several days. You can see this on the GFS. Here's the tropical wave. This is by Saturday afternoon. And the system is riding pretty low, which is what you want to see if you want to get development this time of year in the tropical Atlantic, because further up north, the thermodynamic profile is not yet suited for tropical development. I can show you this if we look at the sea surface temperature plot across the Atlantic. And you can see just off the coast of Africa near the Cabo Verde Islands, we have plentiful waters, 24, 25 degrees Celsius. And this is promoting a lot of dry air at this time of year that often goes further west into the tropical Atlantic and into the Caribbean. And so this usually further north in these main tropical latitudes limits how much intensification or development rather you can get out of tropical waves this time of the year. Now, the system is forecast, like I mentioned, to ride pretty south. You can see on the GFS, it continues riding generally around 10 north for the next several days, but begins to lift north by early week, and we see a little compact tropical depression or storm form on the model by Tuesday or Wednesday next week, though it doesn't last all too long. On this forecast, it decays rather quickly. Now, normally this would be something you look at and it's like, well, okay, see what other models say, because sometimes the GFS can be pretty strong with this. But we have seen today the European model also try and show development out of this tropical wave. And so now we can look at the environment surrounding it and get a sense of, well, why is it developing? Well, one thing is that even though the thermodynamic profile is not that suited further north, down south, usually this time of year have the intertropical convergence zone sitting in here. And that can act as a pretty good source of moisture for these tropical waves as they come west. You can see in this relative humidity plot that we have all the dry air further north, like I just mentioned, but where the tropical wave is it's embedded within the intertropical convergence zone. And so it's embedded within a good region of moisture. So that allows it to form because really in the central tropical Atlantic, the trade winds are not too strong. And we do have some light winds aloft on this model, which is favorable in configuration for some development to occur. Alongside that, the intertropical convergence zone is by itself a zone of background vorticity or spin, and it can help these tropical waves spin up. And we've certainly seen development like this occur. You can see this is a very compact system. One that immediately comes to mind is Hurricane Beryl of 2018, not last year, but way back in 2018. That was a system like this that formed in the MDR at a fairly low latitude and was a fairly compact system. And so it was allowed to form because by itself, more compact systems are able to intensify more quickly and develop quickly than bigger systems are. And now that has some downsides with it. As the system continues to get west, as I mentioned, it doesn't really last too long on the JFS model, and the European is the same. It doesn't last all too long. And that's because this time of year is a climatological peak of easterly trade winds in the Caribbean. You might have heard it a lot in this time of year in past hurricane seasons that the Eastern Caribbean is often known as the Caribbean graveyard. And that's because we have very strong trade winds this time of year. If I go out to the 850 millibar height flow on the GFS, you can see that where the system is right now, this is out to Tuesday morning, fairly light trade winds, all things considered. But as you get into the Caribbean, you start to get more 30, 35 knot winds at the 850 millibar level. And what this causes is now air is rushing away from this region in the western tropical Atlantic as the winds speed up. And by definition, that is low-level divergence and creates more dry air east of the Caribbean. So as the system comes in here, it's going to be dealing with all that dry air. But alongside that, I mentioned that the environment is fairly favorable. And typically this is a favorable configuration for a tropical system to form, a area of high pressure directly on top of it. But when you have strong easterly flow in the surface, this is light flow aloft. And so when you put that against, let's say, a sounding, which I can show you here, you'll see that we have light winds aloft with that upper level high pressure system, but we have 20 knot flow, 20 to 25 knot flow down at the surface. And so what happens is the surface center begins to run away from the mid-level axis. And you'll see that happen if we look on the GFS mid-level moisture plot. They're stacked vertically with height when it forms into a tropical depression on this model. But as it comes further west, the wave axis begins to lift a different way in alignment with that upper level high pressure system. But here's that little surface low. You can see that little circle here on the southwest side of this wave axis beginning to run away, and they begin to get vertically tilted. And this tilt only grows as it tracks further west. And without that mid-level axis, it really cannot sustain itself, as it is very susceptible by that point to dry air intrusions, and it really cannot sustain much convection in its own. And so for that reason, the system weakens as it comes west into the Caribbean. Now, all things considered, this is certainly a possible path to genesis, and we could be looking at a brief tropical depression or storm forming in the tropical Atlantic as we head into next week. I mean, after all, we do have this support from the European as well, showing that development. But I don't think it's going to be anything long-lived, and this is certainly not going to be anything like we saw last year in the MDR this time of the year. And that's my general thoughts on this. Now, the Hurricane Center has not marked this at all for any development. I don't know if they are going to tonight. They may tomorrow if model guidance keeps up on this. But regardless, as this wave does come through, and is usual for tropical waves coming through the Caribbean this time of year, we could be looking at heavy rainfall and gusty winds, especially on the north side of that. But that's no different to any other tropical wave. And the good news is here, the environment's not going to be favorable for any intensifying storm here like we saw last year. It's likely just going to be a usual weak tropical wave coming through here that might have a brief chance of becoming a tropical depression or storm. That's all that I've got for today on both of these systems. I'll have more videos on Wipha as the system continues tracking throughout the South China Sea, and we may talk about the tropical Atlantic more as necessary if development odds do begin to increase on model guidance over the next coming days. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.